Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final Service Department News webinar of the year. And this is the session where we look ahead to 2023 and talk about a few trends that we think will resonate across the Service Department, apart hotel and extended stay sectors. My name's George Sell, editor of Service Department News, and we are a multimedia platform of B2B news for the sector. Now, some of the trends we'll talk about today, we touched on at an event that we hosted earlier this week. You might see a couple of familiar faces there. This was across all our B2B web news brands. So as well as this one, we've got boutique hotel news, urban living news, and short-term rentals. We've got three great panelists with us today. And the way the session is going to work is we're going to talk about 6 trends, 3 of which I'll present myself and 3 of which will be Q&As with the guys that you can see on screen there. And I'll ask them all to introduce themselves when we get to their particular trends rather than all in a row now like we normally do on these sessions. It's going to be a slightly different format today. If you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom and we will try and get around to answering them. And everybody who's registered for the session today will receive a link to a recording in their email. Now, this webinar has been sponsored by Muse, who are actually in the news today as they've just secured a nice big tranche of funding. Muse is a next generation hospitality cloud for hotels, hostels, apartments and more. It gives hoteliers the power to provide a remarkable guest experience while improving the operations and performance of their property, thanks to smart automation and an innovative, user-friendly set of products and features. If you'd like to find out more about Muse, then please have a look in the chat where you will see their contact details. So let's move on to our first trend. And this is about service department operators moving into the build-to-rent sector. I think Native were probably the pioneers of this. Native are an apart hotel brand, but they now have a bigger build-to-rent pipeline than they do in the apart hotel space. We've also seen this year Flying Butler has launched a build-to-rent brand. And the latest to throw their cap in the ring is Charles Hope. And we've got Richard here to talk about that. Richard, can you just introduce yourself quickly and then we'll ask you a bit more about your plans for build-to-rent.
Of course. So I'm Richard Maurin. I'm the group CEO of Charles Hope. We're a service department operator, a developer, and now also a build-to-rent operator.
So why did you decide to move into the build-to-rent space, Richard? Was it the kind of similarities in the operational skills needed, or was it a building opportunity that came along?
It's probably a little bit of both. Since our inception, we have worked within the build-to-rent sector, but generally as a tenant. So we can see from a tenant's viewpoint exactly how the service levels differ from the service levels that we offer within service departments. There are mass similarities within the sector, and build to rent, in my view, have been trying to perhaps go into the service department sector because they've recruited from hotels, service department, purpose-built student accommodation sectors to build their own brands. The build to rent sector came about because it wants to improve standards in the living environment. To do that, they also want to improve their asset value. To improve the asset value, they add things such as amenity space and also the standards that you get offered compared to a normal rental. And all of those things are things that service department operators already do. So we have, in my view, a far higher guest experiences than you would in a build to rent product, which we're hoping we can pass on into that sector. The standards, the standards are exactly the same, but the service levels are very different. So if we had, for example, an issue in one of our apartments, our guests will expect that to be fixed same day, and so will the agent that we may have got the business from, the employer that we may have got the business from. Within the build to rent sector at the moment, it's not quite the same. It's, if a leaking tap is leaking, you might wait 5 days. We can't say to our guests, you've got to wait 5 days because it's just not acceptable. So we're going to try and pull some of that into the build to rent sector to increase the standards and therefore increase the ROI for the investor, because we're doing a sort of a blended approach. But a lot of traditional build to rent operators don't manage revenue. They manage revenue in a sense that there's a set of revenue targets, but we're looking to physically maximize the revenue from the asset by a blended approach. So in our BTR units, there will be an element of serviced, and it will be managed by Charles Hope. And we will offer additional services. So in our newest building, our first building that we're opening, we're going to have a Starbucks on the ground floor. So it's a different sort of thing than a lot of the traditional operators have offered. So we're just trying to bring a bit of hospitality, I suppose, into the living sector.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about this first project? Where is it, and when will this be happening?
So our first one is in Brentford. It's actually next door to a current site of ours. So we have a service department building in Brentford, and we have taken the whole development now, 3 of the buildings under a management contract, which will total 278 apartments. And then our serviced element is on the same site. So we are creating a form of like gated community, really, with gym, roof terrace, cafe, co-workspace, lounges. So pretty much the same as everybody else, but just with a little bit of a different flair. With a 24-hour concierge on site all the time, backed up by our staff in Cape Town. So each apartment will have a phone line that you literally just pick up and you can speak to someone in customer services straight away. So it's a little bit hotel-y in some respects, but we think it adds to that experience. So yeah.
And that's opening next year, did you say?
It opens on, we have a soft opening on the 22nd of December, so we're not far away. So we have people actually moving in already. Our official opening date is the 5th of January.
And you said you're intending to have a blend of build to rent units and serviced apartments in the same development. Is that the kind of blueprint you want to take going forward? And what would roughly be the ratio of one to the other?
It will depend site by site. We're going to add a little bit of, in some of our sites, we've got one opening in Uxbridge that will have a little bit of co-living, a floor of co-living there. So generally each site, we don't really want to go above 9% serviced, purely for, well, it's down to asset reasons, but that in most sites is a comfortable number, because otherwise you get to a point where it's oversaturation.
And are your owners or investors experiencing any issues with planning by trying to incorporate different uses in the same building?
So yes, in a word, it's something we're getting through. It's in London, we have to be exceptionally careful around the 90-day rule. The other issue we have is the ultimate investor. So we have the asset manager, but beyond that, they also have funders. So it's still very new, and I think actually the chap at Vonda was talking about this last week with you. It's still very difficult for banks and investment institutions to get their head around all these different asset classes all merging into one, because there is no blueprint. A lot of these funds get funding for a particular reason. So they get funding for student service to some extent, and build to rent, and perhaps older living. But to have the mix, it's unusual. We're lucky that we're working with a really free thinking and perhaps a slightly more loose reins company to do this. So hopefully others will follow after they've seen the results.
Yeah. Finally, Richard, obviously you've got a well-honed routine for customer acquisition on the service department side through the agencies you mentioned and through your contacts within companies. How are you going to attract your build to rent customers? What are the distribution channels that you'll be using for build to rent?
So to some extent, a lot of them will be the traditional routes. So Rightmove, Zoopla, the locations website. We do a lot on digital marketing and social media marketing. It's I'm told by our marketing director, it's the new way to get some of these younger people, or certainly younger than me, to buy things from you, or to buy an experience, or even in this case, buy a lifestyle. And then it's a little bit prop tech. So we're working with people at Homes, and accommodation.co.uk, because there's sort of a little bit of a middle one in between long stay traditional websites and short stay service department websites that you might go on to get something for 90 days. These are sort of the 90 days to 365. So they sort of got a sweet spot that we're working with at the moment.
Yeah. So 90 days will be your minimum stay for the build to rent units, will it, or will it be longer than that?
No, 90 days is our minimum. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We did a webinar last week for our Urban Living News brand about Gen Z customers and what they want from accommodation. And there was a GM from a Greystar build to rent building on there, and she was saying that Instagram and TikTok are extremely fruitful distribution channels for them, and they get a lot of leads through there. So it's marketing channels. It's an interesting one. It's definitely changing fast.
It's very different. When perhaps I was looking to rent somewhere, it was more about was it a nice clean location. Now is it picture perfect for some of the younger people.
Yeah. Perhaps actually one of my colleagues who's running this webinar in the background can post a link to the recording of that Gen Z video, because there's some quite interesting stuff in there. Thanks, Richard. That was really interesting. If you'd like to connect with Richard on LinkedIn, his details are in the chat there. I'd encourage you to carry on the conversation with him, and we'll move on to our second trend. Thanks, Richard. So I think in the next year or so, we are going to see a lot more brand launches in the extended stay hotel sector. Through the pandemic and now beyond it, particularly in the US, the extended stay sector outperformed the wider hotel market significantly through a combination of self-contained units and a client base made up of sectors which carried on throughout, so construction workers, healthcare workers, and so on. They managed to trade through while most other hotels were forced to shut. The economy end of the segment was the strongest performer, but by this summer, according to figures from the Highland Group, the upscale extended stay sector was regularly recording higher rates than it was in 2019. There have also been some very interesting new brand launches, the most notable of which is Wyndham's Project Echo. Echo stands for Economy Hotel Opportunity. It was announced in February this year, and by September, it had already signed 100 properties, making it the fastest growing of Wyndham's 22 brands. And then Extended Stay America, which used to have just one brand, now has 3, with the most recent being the September launch of Select Suites. Choice Hotels has rebranded its Suburban Extended Stay franchise to Suburban Studios. And last month, Best Western announced the launch of Home by BWH, a mid-scale extended offering. If we can flick onto the next slide. Yeah, the thing that's intriguing me is how many of these US extended stay brands, and there are a lot of them now, will come over to Europe, because the few that have, and you can see some of them on here, Staybridge Suites, Residence Inn, and Hyatt House, have all done very well, but it hasn't tempted the rest over yet. Obviously, these have got suitably amended brand standards from what they do in the US, but they're all trading really well. So I think we might see some more come over. And the sector in general became hot property during the pandemic, and I think it's still getting hotter. We'll see a wave of new brand launches in 2023. So let's go on to our third trend, and this is accommodation providers will have to provide evidence of their ESG performance to satisfy travel buyers. And we're going to have a quick chat now with Alex from SilverDoor. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself quickly, please?
Hello, yeah, I'm Alex Neale. I'm the group head of partner relationships here at SilverDoor, and to put that in layman's terms, it means I'm responsible for the supply chain here. I've been at SilverDoor for 13 years now, the majority of which has been client facing, but the last 5 years have been on the supply side. SilverDoor is an international service department agency, the largest independent agency of its type, and by independent I mean we don't own or manage any property. We offer an unbiased viewpoint to the market for both our clients and our partners.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex, and thanks for joining us today. So from your observations, Alex, how are travel buyers' ESG requirements evolving, and what do they expect of an accommodation provider?
The first point on this question, I think, is the fact that is to highlight there are 3 areas to ESG, and 2 areas arguably are already key factors in the decision-making process from the client side. In the case of governance, there's a lot that's already happened. Back in February 2020, client feedback led to SilverDoor overhauling its own health and safety policies, which included vetting accreditation bodies and collecting a significantly increased amount of data and evidence on our partners' health and safety and compliance. The pandemic escalated that urgency from all parties, particularly around safety and hygiene. Partners have invested in many ways in this area, including accreditation and health and safety measures. And whilst there's always more that can be done, such as getting these accreditations recognized by clients and developing a global corporate standard for accommodation, I think a significant part of the evolution has already happened. The same applies to the social aspect. Again, the pandemic really shifted the priorities in respect of traveler well-being, having a comfortable working place alongside either in the apartment or a co-working incorporated in the service department offering or apart hotel has been a big change. Well, there's been a big change in that area, as well as things like pet-friendly options and people wanting to travel with pets, and making sure that travelers' mental well-being is being looked after as much as their physical. I think there are still areas in the social side to develop, mostly around DE&I, where there's possibly a lot of things to consider. But perhaps this question's most prominent at the moment, or the highest focus at the moment, is on environmental policy, and in that respect, there's been huge change at high level, perhaps not so much on the ground. So many large, more multinational corporations are already looking to their supply chain to help them meet carbon net zero targets, which some of them have set as early as 2030, and we've seen a huge increase in the questions on RFPs and the weighting for environmental sections of RFPs recently. It's inevitable. At the moment, that's still at the high level. I think that it's inevitable to have the success at that level. There needs to be more change on the ground, and I think that's where this trend is going to. It feels like price and traveler well-being are still the key decision-making factors at the point of booking, but changes are happening. To make those changes, it's not just about the priorities that the buyers have, but it's also about access to data. There's currently very little to allow the booker of apartments to understand the environmental impact of their choice. So that's really something that has to change.
Are you able to give us an idea of some of the environmental criteria that are being included in these RFPs? What are buyers actually asking for?
I'll keep a list of questions here, actually. So we've got things like, do you have a carbon emissions reduction commitment? When you're planning to achieve it? Could you provide carbon emissions reporting for the last full year? And is your company purchasing more or less energy from renewable sources? And then, of course, there's a lot about how we, how do we measure it? How do we monitor the ESG effects on the supply chain, and how do we make sure that the supply chain is delivering a significant impact? Of course, us as an agency we can get our own house in order, but the real heavy effect on the environment is at the stay point of the process.
Yeah. So they want data, they want measurable performance, which is, as you say, not always there at the moment. But are you starting to see some clients willing to pay a premium for accommodation which can, which can demonstrate it is meeting all these criteria?
Well, in a couple of ways, it could be argued that they are already. I mentioned that there's wholesale increases in investment in health and safety compliance. There's also key investment in traveller welfare, and those costs, the cost of that investment will have already had an impact on pricing. So in a sense, the consumer is already paying for that. From an environmental perspective, again, I think we've got clients at different stages of their process. I know that you, George, used the sensational headline in your article following our partner engagement day for our audience. It was corporate buyers are willing to pay sustainability premium, which was exactly what one buyer said on the day. So I think that, it is true for a segment of the audience, but perhaps isn't a typical perspective yet. Current market conditions are also potentially hampering ambitions to invest in this field. We've seen, tech giants reducing staff numbers, and there's a general tightening of the purse strings. And in the UK, I think that at the moment, it's only the large corporations that must comply with the SECR policy. And at the moment, that's only required for scope 1 and 2. So it's those that are anticipating the change in that legislation that might be most keen to or prepared to spend more to make sure that they're complying with potential scope 3. There's also geographical differences. There's different social pressures in different areas, and there's different legislative pressures as well. Yeah. So yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, but I think it's fundamentally all our clients are in different places along the journey.
Yeah. I can't believe that Service Department News has been described as sensationalist. That's surely never happened before. Just one last question, Alex. Obviously, the kind of the end game for this is that all providers of accommodation are going to have to gradually meet more and more stringent targets, and this is going to involve upgrading and retrofitting existing inventory to make sure they're eligible for these RFPs. Are you starting to see this happen? And is the industry in general at the start of this product, or are we a fair way along the road yet, this process? Sorry.
Well, until the benchmarking is in place and it's commonplace for the carbon footprint of a stay, I think that it's difficult to demonstrate the ESG credentials by means of property upgrade. That being said, I suppose if I look at it another way, in terms of costly upgrades, I don't think that the wider market can tolerate the rate hikes as well. However, when a property is going to invest that money, incorporating ESG ambitions is increasingly common and appropriate. I think that legislation is probably still the biggest driving factor. ESG conscious buyers are probably less likely to drive heavy duty change than policy. In the UK, again, the SECR, is mandating large clients to report on emissions and efficiency measures, and the COP summits are increasing pressure on governments to deliver wholesale changes there. But right now, the corporate market is much more likely to encourage buyers to look for efficiencies which aren't expensive or may even reduce costs. I think that the buyers are looking at in-your-face changes as possibly more impactful, such as bike stores and solar panels and the removal of single-use plastics in toiletries, etc. But with the market moving towards measurables, hopefully that will allow more behind-the-scenes processes to come to the fore. I certainly think that that's the real big point here, is that we need to deliver a way of demonstrating choice by displaying the environmental impact of the stay, and that allows us to open up the market to heavy investment in sustainable changes.
Yeah. Alex, you mentioned that the current economic situation might kind of slow this whole process down a little bit, but presumably the general direction of travel is that the ESG requirements of travel buyers are only going to get stiffer as time goes on. As we become more able to measure and demonstrate these things. So, if providers aren't thinking about this and strategizing for it now, then they really need to.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Alex. That was more interesting stuff. Let's move on to our next trend. And this is about unit design flexing to accommodate new traveller groups. So as the ways in which people work and travel for work are evolving, accommodation providers will have to adapt their physical products to cater for these trends. Now, an early example of this is Adagio's Co-Living by Adagio brand, which made its debut in Paris earlier this year. And this has units aimed at groups of up to 8 people looking to share a living space for both work and leisure. The co-living apartments can be adapted by having 3, 4, 5, or even 6 ensuite bedrooms of 15 square meters each, with the option of twin or king size beds. And these rooms are all set around a living room area, which can range from 40 to 80 square meters, depending on the number of bedrooms within the unit. And the design is meant to encourage guests to gather and socialize. It also contains a large kitchen area for eating and socializing, and amenities including a washing machine, worktop areas with easy access plugs for laptops and phones, Bluetooth, games, and books. And similarly, over in the US, Method Co has included an element of co-living at its latest Roost apart hotel in Tampa, Florida. The co-living units there each feature a living room, kitchen, and laundry area, as well as 8 adjoining bedrooms in this case, each with its own private bathroom. The layout can be adapted according to use, as bedrooms can be linked by one by one or in groups of 4 or 8. And this is a concept that Roost calls a hotel within a hotel. And I think these two are just going to be the first of quite a few innovative design, flexible unit designs to cater for different traveller demographic groups. So from Paris and Florida, we are going to go to less traditional service department destinations, shall we say. And the next trend is the apart hotel hits the beach and beyond. And for this, I'd like to welcome Ben Harper. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, hi George, Ben Harper. I'm Group Managing Director with Beach Retreats, which is a self-catering platform or vacation rental, if you're American, Another Place and Watergate Bay Hotels. Previously with Seiko, who became Eden, who I'm sure the audience is familiar with.
Thanks, Ben. So you are taking some of the learnings from your career in the service department sector to the upmarket an upmarket leisure offering. So what are the main things that you're taking with you and applying to your new role?
Well, I think it's a very different, a very similar journey, but probably 10 or 15 years later. So if I cast my mind back to when I started out in the service department sector, I look at it in three chunks. Firstly, positioning residential style service departments to a corporate market using fancy slogans such as more space for less and home from home, which I think people have moved on from. And then as operators, we realized quite quickly that that's a really tough market to be in, one by way of supply of inventory, but secondly by way of the operational efficiency. So running a bunch of residential style apartments is tricky business. So then we moved very quickly into the apart hotel space, where we could design and build purpose-built apart hotels, which blended that bit of hotel experience with the flexibility and freedom of service departments. And if you cast minds back to developments that we did, like the Bristol Broadkey and the Manchester development, and then later the Cannon. And then what happened in my last couple of years in the service department space is we realized that there was a real opportunity for brand, right? So we developed and launched the Lock brand, which is now doing great things. And I think that took apart hotels and turbocharged the proposition, because it really proved that actually if you layer in lifestyle brand to a really successful apart hotel model, the commercial benefits are significant, but also the scalability of that platform and the attractiveness from an investor perspective became really clear. So I actually see the same thing happening in the leisure market, and I've seen it for years, and I'm really excited to be starting to actually deliver on that plan. But really, if you step back and think about a market like Cornwall, where there is an abundance of self-catering inventory, for want of a better word, so self-catering holiday businesses and homes. But again, the same challenges remain, which is they are relatively inconsistent, they're difficult to operate, and actually driving any real scale is tricky. But we have very successful lifestyle leisure-facing hotels like Watergate Bay and another place within our stable of brands. And it became very clear, and it has become very clear, that blending those two things in the middle in the same way that we did with the Lock brand or the Seiko apart hotels, there becomes a real opportunity to take the best of lifestyle hotels, blend them with a traditional and perhaps slightly archaic, to be harsh, self-catering world, and you find a real sweet spot in the middle, which we're calling a coastal lifestyle apart hotel. And we've just acquired our first, which is an old hotel, which we will reposition and redevelop into the first Beach Retreats branded apart hotel. So delighted to be back talking to the industry. Can't wait to talk to Alex about the opportunity to start working with the likes of SilverDoor and my other mates back in the industry to see who's up for working with us on the leisure side.
Can you tell us a bit more about this project, Ben, or is it too early for that?
It's a day early. We've been working on this deal for 6 months, and we are there, but it got stuck in a land registry thing somewhere. So it's not quite there. What I can say is that it's on the north coast of Cornwall. It's going to be a 70-bed apart hotel, which combines family studios, 1 beds, 2 beds, 3 beds. It also has planning permissions within the 11 acres of grounds to build out 25 lodges. And it will provide the ability to do exactly what we've seen work beautifully well in urban environments, which is bring in best-in-class local partners to deliver on the F&B, the leisure, to create this real interesting ecosystem of experiences within the ground floor, but the flexibility, freedom and design-led living of apartments upstairs.
So what length of stay will you be offering at this place? Are you anticipating people not just coming for their holidays, but maybe they might come for 2 or 3 months and base themselves with you and work while they're there? Have you got an idea of who's going to be coming and how long they'll be staying?
Yeah, I think the interesting and attractiveness of this model is the fact that we can diversify the segments and length of stay in exactly the same way that we do and did in the corporate and the urban environment, which is in January, you'll quite happily take a 30-day stay at a lower yield for someone who might be coming in to work on a project, or even in this current world, coming in to work in an apartment just so they can surf before and after work. And whilst it's quite an exciting segment to think about, what's very clear is that in school holidays we will be driven by the leisure family market. So I think we can tap into a variety of segments which really deseasonalizes what would traditionally be a very seasonal market, which is obviously what drives the commerciality of the business.
Yeah. And what are you looking for in terms of locations, Ben? Obviously, this new property is going to be a conversion, but are you looking for new build opportunities as well? And do they have to be right on the beach, or can you be flexible in your approach?
No, from a brand proposition perspective, Beach Retreats, the promise is that it's walking distance to a beach. Yeah. We won't compromise on that. We also we're thinking beyond perhaps the more established coastal markets, like, for example, Salcombe, which is really saturated, very, very attractive from an investor's perspective because it drives high yield. But we think from our brand's perspective, and also the opportunity to enter a market, that actually more up and coming seaside towns that add that level of interest, but also present the opportunities in the form of perhaps hotels who've slightly lost their position in the market, present us an opportunity. So less mainstream premium market, more up and coming, perhaps more edgy and authentic coastal locations within the UK.
Okay, so you're not just focusing on the southwest, it could be anywhere around the country.
No, I mean, Beach Retreats as a brand travels anywhere. I'm not getting too excited about it, having had experience of pushing these things into Europe. I know it takes a whole layer of complexity, so we are focused very much on the UK market. We have acquired this first site to prove the concept, and we've done it with our own investment, which means that we can control it and we can control the pace of it. But I think the model scales, and again, one of our key drivers at the moment is to make sure that we do a brilliant job of executing this first project well, and I'm hoping that it will gain some traction and interest from the investment community, and we're able to roll out the brand across other coastal markets in the UK.
Will that be on a lease model, Ben, or a management agreement? How do you see that working?
I think in this market we have to be flexible. I think leases are challenging, just from a risk perspective, but management deals are also challenging, and we speak from experience here in the fact that obviously the upside is less so, but also the lack of control and the pace of being in somebody else's hands. So I think that there's a number of routes that we can take. We're really excited about the brand. I'm very ambitious for it, and we will be flexible, but we'll do it on our own terms. And as I say, our focus in the next 18 months will be to get this first project over the line. But in that time, we'll be having discussions with others about the future.
Yeah, okay. Do you think, Ben, as customer tastes are evolving, that all new leisure properties, whether the new build or conversion, across the hospitality sector, will be expected to include an apartment offering as a given? We won't see new hotels built just with, small rooms. They'll have to have more of a residential offer too.
I think it's tricky to say that no hotels will be just hotels. In fact, I think it's impossible to. I think a lot of it is to do with scale and development capability, and boutique hotels hold a certain position in the market, which I think will still be attractive in certain markets. What I do know is that I hope with the likes of what we're doing with Beach Retreats, we will start in the same way that happened in the corporate environment and the urban environment. We'll start to create a new category that people really associate with, and that becomes more mainstream, and therefore I think more consumers and travelers will ask for it, therefore it will be built. And I think this concept that actually finding new ways for hotels who are perhaps finding it hard, both in the current climate, but within these coastal locations, to drive profitability and to de-seasonalize their business, providing that additionality of different segments and different models will become really attractive. So I think it's a bit of a loose answer. I think there will be hotels who will always be hotels and not look to get into this space, but I think this will, as a category, I think this will start to grow quite quickly.
Yeah. And finally, Ben, have you set yourself a target for a number of signings for beach retreats over the next few years?
No, I think it's difficult to do that. I set myself a target of establishing the strategy and to shaping the brand and to delivering the first site, which I know from experience is really important because it's all very well having a concept, but until people can see it, experience it and kick the tires on it, I think it's just an idea. So that has been my target for the last few years, actually. And of course, COVID slowed down that slightly. So I'm delighted that we're where we are. I think the next, as I say, 12 to 18 months will be about developing this out, making it the best it can be, really establishing something innovative and market leading and different, and then looking to scale from there. Yeah,
excellent. Thank you, Ben. A busy year ahead for you. Best of luck with it.
Yeah, thanks, George.
So we'll move on to our final trend for today, and this is titled Tech-Driven Hybrid Hospitality Operators Will Flourish. As you can see by the screen grabs on the slide there, there's a really interesting new wave of operators who are taking the best bits of the service department and short-term rental sectors, combining them with cutting-edge technology and catching the eye of the investment community. Several of these flex living hybrids have secured significant funding this year, and I think they're paving the way for more of their type to follow in 2023. Numa Group has partnered with LaSalle to launch a €500 million pan-European portfolio. Now, the aim of this partnership is to acquire, refurbish and operate vacant city centre hotels, serviced and extended stay apartments, boutique hotels, as well as conversion projects in urban locations across Western Europe. So they're not limiting themselves to one particular niche. They're quite flexible in the type of property they're looking for. They've got 15 properties in the pipeline already across the UK, Spain, Italy and the Netherlands, representing more than €450 million in value. Bob W has secured €21 million in Series A funding, led by IDC Ventures, Elevator Ventures, Verve Ventures and Flashpoint. Based in Helsinki and Tallinn, Bob W serves consumers as well as companies, including international startups and next generation enterprises in fields such as tech and the creative industries. The company says it's seen year-on-year revenue grow by 800%, and it's going to use the new funding to expand into new and existing markets, as well as scaling its autonomous tech platform. Finally, Munich-based Limehome has closed a funding round of €45 million in new growth capital involving new and existing investors. Since its founding in 2018, the Munich-based startup has expanded into more than 100 locations and has more than 3,000 apartments under contract in 7 countries. These companies are good at creating a brand, their properties have local character, and they are appealing to both the business and the leisure traveller. I think we'll be seeing more of these tech-driven brands popping up and flourishing in 2023. So those are our 6 trends for next year. I'd just like to show you a few slides quickly before we close off. As I mentioned earlier, this is the last Service Department News webinar of this year, but we haven't got much of a break. We'll be back on the 12th of January when we will be discussing the distribution landscape. And if you'd like to register for that, you can see the link in the chat. Later in January, we will be in Lisbon for our Recharge event, which is fantastic. It's a really fun, innovative and interactive event. It moves from different European cities every year, and we're very much looking forward to being in Lisbon. Again, you can see some more information about that in the chat. If you'd like to work with us here at IHM on any of our digital offerings, our live events or our award schemes, please get in touch with my colleague Katie, whose details are on the screen and again in the chat. And I'd just like to say thank you to Muse for sponsoring. Thank you to our contributors today, Richard, Ben and Alex. thanks to you all for watching. We're going to leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can take some notes from all the information in the chat. Have a wonderful festive break, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the new year. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.